Hello and welcome to Lesson 3 on QBASIC programming. As you can see from our rem statement at the top here, we're looking at random numbers today, or rather pseudo-random numbers, which are about as close as we can get in a computer program. Right, first let's see the command to generate a random number. Well, the print statement, which we've seen before, is just printing a value on the screen. It's the RND statement here, which is doing the random number generation bit. So this instruction generates a random number and then prints it to the screen. So let's save the program and run it. And we've generated a random number, 0.7055475. Fantastic. Now, the RND generates a number between 0 and 0.9999999 inclusive. So that's one of 10 million distinct different values that might be generated. Now at first sight that doesn't look terribly useful. Maybe we'd rather have simple random numbers like 1, 2, 3, whole numbers and so on. But we can manipulate our result into whatever format we want, and we'll find out how to do that shortly. So let's run our random number program again. Now we've got it working. And oh, look at that, 0.7055475. That looks a bit familiar. Doesn't sound so random, does it? Alright, let's try that again then. So run, start, no look, 0.7055475. It's generated the same number again. And therein lies our first problem. It doesn't look actually very random. Okay, here's a trick. We can use the timer function to check how many milliseconds have passed since midnight, which will vary every time you run the program, and we can use that as a seed for our random number generator. It doesn't use the timer as a random number itself, but as a starting point for it to pick a number from its random number list. So simply add this line to the start of any program in which you plan to use random numbers, and then each RND command in the program will actually produce a different random number each time you use it. So let's run that again. So save and run. And this time we've got a different number. Let's try that again. There we go, different number again. And again. So that is now generating much more random looking random numbers. Now remember, you only have to put this randomized timer instruction once at the start of your program, and that will make every time you use the RND function in the program generate a different random number. So you don't need to put a randomized timer before every time you call the RND command. Our next trick is to put the random number in a numeric variable rather than just printing it. That way you can turn it into a useful value and use it to control the flow of our code, which is kind of the whole point of all this. So rather than printing RND, I've generated a random number and I've stuck it into variable which I've called num. You can call that variable anything you like. It doesn't have a dollar on the end, so it's a number variable. Remember we learned about those in lesson 1. So we've got our number variable called num, and we stick a random number in there. And now if I want to find out what's in there, I can print num. So that's not drastically different from what we had before, but we'll see the advantages of doing it this way later, although it looks at the moment like we've just generated an extra line of code. So let's run it and see what it does. So let's save our program and run. There we go. And there's another random number. Now that looks a little bit horrible, but remember this is just the system's way of telling us that this is in standard form, times 10 to the power of minus 2, so we have to move that decimal place 2 places to the left. So this actually represents the number 0.099455315. Right, so now we've got a random number generator which is actually generating different numbers every time. Huzzah! Progress. Let's turn this program into a random integer, say between 1 and 20. So what we can do is this. And this takes the random decimal number that we generated and multiplies it by 20. So we've now got a number between 0 and 19.999998. It then discards all the decimal places. The int instruction throws away all the decimal places. So we've got a number between 0 and 19. And now by adding 1 to that, we've got a number between 1 and 20. So if you wanted a random number between 1 and 5, say, you just have to change the 20 to a 5. Let's save that and run it, see what happens. 18. Run it again. 10. And one more time just for luck. 17. Different numbers every time. Random number generator. Fantastic. Now sometimes when you run it, you might get the same number coming up 2 or 3 times in a row. I don't seem to be getting that at the moment, but if you did, that wouldn't be a problem. In random things, if you were to roll a dice, for example, sometimes you'd get the number 5, 2 or 3 or even 4 times in a row. It doesn't mean it's not random, but over the long term, you should get a nice even spread of all the different numbers in a random order. Well, next I'm going to combine the RND command with what we learned last lesson and write a little program to test our random number generator by generating lots and lots of random numbers altogether rather than having to keep running the program repeatedly. So I've created a little loop that runs 100 times, generates a random number between 1 and 20, prints that number and then goes back to the top of the loop. So then just by running this once, we're going to generate 100 random numbers. And when we run it, we can see that we've got a whole list of numbers here. Look, 5 came up a few times, came up twice in a row, but generally speaking, we've got a nice random spread of numbers. Now, the other thing that you might notice here is that although I've generated 100 random numbers, we've only got a few on the screen here. So the problem was, because the screen's only 23 lines long, we can't see the first 77 numbers because they've whizzed off the top of the screen. So what I can do is add a little thing here. I'm going to tell you more about this in the next lesson, but if I add this little semicolon on the end of the print statement, instead of jumping to the next line and printing the next number, it's going to carry straight on printing on the same line. So let's save that and run it. Here we go. So the numbers are now printing across the screen. As soon as it gets to the end of the line, it wraps round and carries on going through. So I've got, a few occasions where I've got a couple of 7s in a row, and what else have we got here? And up here we've got the number 1 3 times in a row, but that's just the nature of randomness. Sometimes the same number does come up a few times in a row. Not really a problem. Overall, this is looking nice and random. Now, just before we go, let's have a quick look at the help system. So on QB64, if I click on help, there's a keyword index here. So if I click on the keyword index, and then I'm going to go for alphabetical listings. Let's just type R for RND, and it's finding the first instruction that begins with R. Now, at the beginning of your help system here, there's lots of instructions that have got an underscore. These are system based instructions, so I won't worry about these for now. But if I press R again, eventually, here we go, we've got the random instruction, randomize, okay, and when we get to the RND instruction, hitting R, double click on that, and it's going to tell me all about RND. See, a function returns a random number with a value between 0 and 1 exclusive, as we said earlier, and you can see lots of examples in here of how it works and lots of detail about how to use randomize. It's even got a couple of bits of example code in here you can mess around with. A nice little link to Wikipedia if you want to look at other types of random number on the system. When you finish looking at the help file, just press the X key here and you'll be back to your program. Well, I hope you find that useful, and we'll see you in the next lesson, all about strings and concatenating strings and playing with your output, making it look pretty.